See the lady laughing over on the left-hand side? That's Melba Jimenez. And I met her in 2006. And she is the one who said, you know, the people in El Salvador have been through a civil war. They're very practical people. They don't really get this whole focusing thing when you go in and you start trying to teach focusing. But nonviolent communication, that's a name, that's an idea. Everyone here wants to have less violence. So why don't you teach nonviolent communication? So I had just learned nonviolent communication, but I noticed that when I started out with the engaging and fun exercises that have been developed in nonviolent communication, the people's eyes would light up and they'd be much more engaged. And there are also these wonderful, you know, the puppets. Over here is right in the middle of the screen is the giraffe puppet, and then Melba over on the left has her giraffe ears on that illustrate different ways to listen. And so we just started having a lot of fun with it and a lot of engagement on the part of the people in community organizations that were a part of a network of organizations that Melba was familiar with, mostly all of them having been formed at the end of the Civil War to help people repatriate and to keep people together. So this is Melba, and if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't be talking about this combination today. Now, after 10 years, we're starting to work with a lot of youth groups, which is so great because a lot of us focusers are getting old, and it's wonderful that through the youth organizations in El Salvador, we're able to reach a lot of wonderful young people. We're working, my assistant in El Salvador, Hazel Martinez, is working with about 4 different youth group organizations. So that's a wonderful new development that seems to be really catching hold. Okay, so I want to go through the concepts that are common to both focusing and NVC, especially as far as self-empathy and creating the focusing attitude. In focusing, we have ways of talking about the focusing attitude, but I find that that starting with nonviolent communication gives us the same thing, but in a way that seems to be more relevant to the people that we're working with there. So the elements that are common are pausing, listening, empathy, self-empathy, and getting to know the intricacy of the inner world. So here's where we start. This is a wonderful diagram made by my friend Wendy Weber, and we start in the middle of this diagram where it says there's a big red splotchy difficult situation. And in the middle of that, we have the pause. See the pause there right in the middle. And so if people, we present it as an opportunity. If you pause in the middle of a difficult situation, then you can decide which way you want to go. Do you want to go into this upper circle of naming and blaming, diagnosing, saying, well, the problem with him is he's just crazy, or judging right and wrong, or dehumanizing, those people, they're just not like us or whatever, not listening. And all of this, if communication starts out there, it can spiral out of control into the violent reaction that you see in the upper right-hand corner. But in the pause, we can also decide to go inside, listening to oneself. What do I feel? What do I need? listening for feelings and needs in others, and then noticing inside, is there a willingness on my part to connect with this other person? So this is the first handout that we usually give to people, and it's in Spanish, of course. And uh, it becomes the first homework that we give to people. We say during the week, just pause and see, pause in a situation and see what happens. And I learned from a wonderful young man, Jero Romero, who you'll see later. He wrote back and he said, I'm sorry, I can't pause. I can't do it. And I said, well, that means that you must have tried to pause. And he said, oh, yes, I tried, and I saw how difficult it was. So now we include in the homework, we say, if I paused, and then give an example of pausing. And another thing is, I tried to pause, and I saw how difficult it was. So we acknowledge and normalize the fact that pausing is extremely difficult and requires a lot of practice. So anyway, that's how we start presenting kind of both the showing all the judging and diagnosing as part of the outer mental thought reactions, and the going inside and listening to oneself as part of, it's like a doorway to focusing. It's like showing that we can go inside and we don't have to just react. And there was another man in one of our classes that he called it the El Ocho, so because it looks like a figure eight, and he said, I did the ocho. So that's it's just a way that this diagram seems to speak to people. If you are actually in a difficult situation with other people, you might have to leave the room, or you might have to listen. You might have to make a special time to be listened to by a friend before you can actually, have the necessary atmosphere and time to go into listening to oneself and saying, what do I feel and what do I need? But as one practices doing nonviolent communication and focusing, one becomes more accustomed to the pause. But of course, it's either by yourself or with someone else. But the important thing is to learn how to do it. And of course, in a real difficult situation, it's very, very difficult in the beginning to just make that pause. Okay, so here's an example of one of Melba Jimenez, the woman that I showed you in the first slide. She is a veteran of the Salvadoran Civil War. And the war ended in 1992, but it wasn't until a couple of years ago that the veterans of the guerrilla, or the guerrilla forces, were recognized as legitimate veterans in the country. And so now many women veterans are getting together and organizing themselves to get health care and to even begin to talk about the trauma that they went through during the war. So they've responded with a lot of enthusiasm to Melba's offering workshops using a lot of the materials that we're going to be talking about now. And here's a group in Guarjila, which was one of the areas most affected by the war, of people just learning to listen in pairs, listen without advising, without giving your opinion, without consoling, or just showing that you're there listening in silence. So that's the exercise. And okay, so here's the listening practice. And sometimes people, we just have the one-way listening with silence. And sometimes people that are listening, at the end of it, we ask them how it felt to just listen. And they say, oh, I was so uncomfortable because it was a conversation. I felt like I should be, saying something and participating. And then some people feel that way. But usually the person that is being listened to says, oh, it was the first time in my life that anyone's ever just listened to me and let me talk. And so that way people learn the value of listening. Okay. Now we also have another wonderful member, Crisia Ramirez, who has gone back to her hometown and worked in the high school. Wait a minute, I'm trying to move this around. Worked in the high school with kids that that were, she said they were seniors in high school, and when she would ask them, well, what's your plan? You know, what are you going to do after high school? They would say, well, I don't know. And so she started familiarizing them with feelings and needs, which are which we adapted a game called Feelings and Needs Poker, which was invented by Lucy Liu, who's a very honored NVC theorist and author. And she invented this game to use in the California prison system because it's a card game, and people can relate to card games. And so you write these are obviously handmade little cards that have feelings on them, emotions like, you know, happy, sad, upset, angry, things like that. And the one person in the group tells a story, and then the other people in the group pick the feelings cards that they think might have been what that person was feeling. And so that's a way of showing empathy. And they place these feelings cards in front of the person who told the story. And the person who told the story can discard any of the feelings cards that were put in front of them if those feeling cards are not relevant to them. So it's already also illustrating how the focuser is the one who knows what's going on inside. If somebody put down anxious and upset, and I'm the person who's talking, I could say, well, yeah, I was anxious, but I wouldn't say I was upset. And that way they're resonating inside. They're feeling, well, they're saying, well, did I feel that or not? And they're not allowing someone else to tell them what they feel inside. They're looking for it themselves. So there's a lot of engagement here. And then the second part of the game is the person they see this variety of emotions that they agree that they had after telling a 3-minute story. And then the person goes through the needs cards, beautiful human needs, which we're going to get to in just a moment. And they lay out all the needs. They become aware of all the needs that gave rise to these emotions that they had. So it's a very effective exercise in looking inside and resonating with what's there. We try to tell people not to tell a story that's, you know, your most deep, you know, and troubling problem. We try to make it kind of light, like, you know what, just tell something an experience that you either liked or didn't like for 3 minutes. I can tell you that in Holland one time when I gave this exercise, a woman talked about going into the store to buy a package of soup and soup mix and coming out of the store. And within that experience, she knew that there was something that was bothering her about that experience of having walked into the store, and she couldn't find the soup that she wanted, and so she walked out of the store. And she had about 15 emotion cards and about 20 needs cards after telling this 3-minute story. And it was because she felt she felt guilty about walking into a store, not finding what she wanted and walking out, like people were watching her, like that wasn't the right thing to do. So I'm giving you that example just because it's a very mundane kind of thing. But otherwise, we're trying to limit the story to 3 minutes. So because the exercise is in actually showing how much is going on inside the person, even though it was just a short experience. So the variety of things that people talk about is immense. But I'm going to go to the next slide. But the surprising thing, and that's why I call this slide implicit intricacy, is that people see how much is going on inside them in a short 3-minute story that they tell. These are all feelings cards that he's found that are relevant to the story that he told. So I hope that answers your question. It can really be any kind of story of an interaction, but we want to avoid the really traumatic experiences with, at least in this particular exercise right now, because we're trying to show more that there is a lot happening inside, even though we're not aware of it. The goals of the game are to, first of all, to practice listening in silence, because only the speaker for 3 minutes is the one. You don't engage in any crosstalk with the speaker. They speak, they tell their story for 3 minutes, and then people listen in silence and they silently put down the cards that they have chosen for that speaker. So that's one goal. The second goal is to kind of exercise the empathy muscle inside the listeners, and exercise the empathy muscle, but also prepare people for the reality that we don't always understand what's going on in someone else. And so as listeners, we have to be willing to be corrected, which is such an important thing in focusing. So, it's not like, I'm so perceptive that I know what this person was feeling and I'm going to put down this, and this. And no, we have to get, loose inside, and the person might discard. It's not a question of, how perceptive and smart I am about the inner reality of this person. It's just, what's my guess about what this person might have felt. And if they discard the card that we chose because it isn't resonating in them, then we go, oh, instead of like, oh, or all this psychological stuff like, well, he's obviously not aware of his fears, something like that. We just try to, another purpose of it is to disband that whole thing that other people know better than I do what I'm feeling. So that's another goal. And the other goals are to just acquaint people with the variety of feelings and needs that are present when they think about the situation. And again, in going into your second question, Manantelda, it's what's present in your consciousness right now when you think of the situation. That's all we can, you can talk about, what you were feeling. We don't really go into that a lot. We just say, whatever, the people are trying to guess what you were feeling at the time of this incident, I guess. So it's, what you are aware of right now that you were feeling at that time, or what your understanding is of your feelings now or at that time. Because it's often, again, this goes to the question about the topics, it's often something that is unresolved. So there might be a lack of clarity about what people are feeling. This is another NVC theoretical chart. So they ask, what game do you want to play? Do you want to play the game of giving and receiving, or do you want to play the game of naming and blaming? And I think we're all familiar with the game of naming and blaming. The goals are to be right, to get what I want. And because I'm right and I can get what I want, I can create a hierarchy, and I'm obviously more powerful than others because I'm so right and I've got what I want. And in contrast, on the left-hand side, the game of giving and receiving, the goals are to make life wonderful, to meet everyone's needs, to create community and have power with others. I think we all, well, I just say, I think that's the kind of society that I would like to see happen in the world. And unless we can take others' needs, our needs and others' needs into account, we're not going to get there. So the motivations over here on the right of the name of gaming and naming and blaming are fear, guilt and shame, obligation and duty, reward and punishment. And all we have to do is think of the political situation to see how prevalent these motivating factors are and how they're used to control people and cut them off from their own life forward movement. So over on the left-hand side, the motivation of the name of giving and receiving is to meet needs through each individual's choice and free will. And I'm going to stop here for a moment, because this thing about choice and free will is a central aspect of nonviolent communication theory, that we are that autonomy is one of the strongest needs in human beings. And if in our interactions we're doing things out of guilt and shame, obligation and duty, reward or punishment or fear, we're not learning how to exercise our choice and free will. So if I, going into that first diagram, if I have expressed my feelings and needs, then I make a request for what would fill my feelings, my needs. And if the person that I make a request to says, no, I can't do that, then it's seen as, wow, that's great. That person is telling me through their no, they're opening the door to my finding out what their needs are. So it's called a memnoon, which I'm not sure of the origin of that word. If anyone knows, please tell me. But it's an opportunity to know the needs of the person who says no. So we always want to make sure that anything that someone does to meet our needs comes from their choice and free will. Okay, now to play the game of naming and blaming, you speak jackal language, which is, again, you judge who's right, who's wrong, you analyze, blame, diagnose, criticize, make demands. That's, without giving a chance for the person to exercise their autonomy and freedom of choice. There's no empathy. You punish or reward. You agree or disagree. You scold, argue, minimize, divert attention. All these things that you've probably are very familiar. And here is two health workers in the town of Ilobasco in El Salvador. The one, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but the woman in the upper right corner has the jackal puppet. And so you can see in her face, in her narrowed eyes, that she's being a jackal, and she's talking as jackalish as she as she can. And you can just see briefly that this woman over here has the giraffe puppet. You can see the little giraffe spots. And so she's practicing responding in giraffe talk, which we'll learn about in a minute. So I just love this picture because they're so into it with the puppets. Okay, now we're going to the next slide. So here is to play the game of giving and receiving. You speak giraffe language. Here's a woman with her giraffe ears. And she's listening. You can see the jackal there in the foreground. She's listening to the jackal. She's trying to share. The first thing is that, okay, I'm going to go into the theory of NVC a little bit. The first thing that you do when you want to resolve something with someone is that you state exactly what was seen and heard as if it could have been recorded on a tape recorder or on a video, instead of saying, you know, hey, when you insulted me last night and just, you know, rubbed me into the dirt, you know, I got really upset. No, you don't say that. You say, when you walked into the room and I was with my friends and you brought up that subject that was, you know, was embarrassing to me, I felt really upset. So you try to say exactly what happened from the outside rather than any language that implies bad intentions on the part of the other people. And this is so common that you know, well, I was late for a, a dinner thing with people 2 weeks ago, and my partner just had all these reasons of why I was late and what I meant and what I was trying to show. And you know, the fact was I was late, and later we got to talk about it. But you know, there can be all kinds of projections and reasons that that people interpret about a situation. So we try to be, from the very outset, very, very cool and just say, you know, when you arrived at 6:30, when I thought you were going to be there at 6, then the next step would be, I felt very angry because I need punctuality and I need respect and I need to know that you care about me. So, so that would be an example of sharing feelings and needs in when you're upset with someone. And then you listen with empathy with your giraffe ears to the feelings and needs of the other. And then you, if needed, you make a request, you know, like, would you be willing to, you know, be more punctual or something like that? Or actually, it should be more specific. And it doesn't apply to this situation that I'm talking about because a lot of other things were happening. So you try to make as specific a request as you can. And you leave others free to say no. That's where the autonomy comes in. And then the real conversation starts. If you make a request and they say no, then you really have to understand more and more about the feelings and needs of both people. Any questions? I'm gonna go through this whole little section here about NVC theory, and then I'll open it up for longer questions and things like that. So now here's another place where the focusing attitude and the nonviolent communication attitude are very similar. When you're being a partner, you don't want people advising you. You don't want people saying, oh yeah, well, that happened to me last week and it was much worse than what happened to you. You don't want people educating each other, consoling, sympathizing, storytelling, just talking without any meaning. Don't want people shutting down, interrogating, explaining, correcting, lecturing, and of course there are many other things that block communication. And here we have the jackal talking to another jackal, and you can see the communication is not warm and fuzzy. It's the lady on the right is just shrinking away from the jackal and listening with her jackal ears. So anyway, you get the idea. And of course, I'll give you a chance to write down your questions if you have them. Okay. Now we're going into a moment when you will be able to look for your own needs. And even though I had done focusing since 1989, before I learned NVC in 2006, I was not aware of my beautiful human needs. I wasn't. I had not encountered this concept. So I sent out this sheet as so that you could all have it with you so that you can look at it. And if you don't have it with you and you can just see it on the screen, I want you to look at all this list of needs. And of course, this is just a partial list of beautiful human needs. But I want you to take a moment to look at the list and feel, like what's resonating for me here as a need. You can think about it in a specific situation that you're involved in, or you can just think of it as in general. For instance, I didn't know that connection, here's right at the very upper left-hand corner. I didn't know that connection was a beautiful human need. So when I saw that, it was like, wow, you mean one of the reasons that I feel frustrated in conversations a lot is because I have a very strong need for connection. And when I don't get it, I get upset. So just take a look slowly. I'm going to give you a minute to look at this list. And just at home on a piece of paper, write the needs that jump out for you or anything that's new or different. And or write them in the chat. That would be very interesting. If you just want to write the needs that resonate for you from this list. And again, this is an exercise in resonating, feeling, what does this word mean to me? Is this something that I really need? So just allow that to happen for a minute, and I'll come back soon. Okay, so I wanted to keep the list up here so people could keep looking at it, but I think you've pretty much, I'm just going to ask, how does it feel to recognize your beautiful human needs? And are any of them surprising to you? Great. Now, here I want to show how teaching nonviolent communication as a doorway to focusing helps people it's like focusing on training wheels, with training wheels. So needs consciousness is the awareness that we all have beautiful human needs and that our feelings arise from our needs being met or unmet. So here's a jackal over at the left speaking jackal language to a young woman at the right who is listening with her giraffe ears on. And this exercise is about listening to yourself inside. How do you, when a jackal comes and says something mean to you, how do you respond to how do you talk to yourself inside in a way that recognizes the difficulty of this situation and how you feel inside? So this is another way of doing one one thing that was illustrated in the Ocho exercise, the first figure-8 diagram, where you know, even in the middle of this difficult situation of a jackal coming up and saying something mean, you go inside and you try to listen to what's going on. How do you feel? What do you need? So, and the other thing is that it creates a pause in the usual cultural responses to conflict. So instead of saying, well, anybody would have reacted that way to somebody walking up to them and saying that, or somebody doing that, you say, no, I need to look at what feelings I had and what specific needs this conversation produced in me. And so it, and the general, what Gendlin is trying to do with the philosophy of the implicit is also create a pause in the usual cultural responses to conflict or any kind of situation, so that we take back our ability to sense what is going on inside with us, rather than responding the way you're supposed to respond or anyone would respond in a given situation. And that pausing of the cultural responses to anything, not only conflict, nonviolent communication creates a space for felt sense formation. So when we go inside and we dwell on feelings and needs, and that creates the holding and letting space that Gendlin says has to happen in order for a felt sense to form freshly. So here, in fact, this is Hero Romero, and he's connected to me by Zoom he's getting into a Wi-Fi signal in a parking lot in San Salvador. And because I was recording this whole session with him, I could record the moment when he went into that holding and letting space. We'd been talking about a conflict that he had, and then you can see how his eyes become unfocused, and he's sensing inside about this conflict. He's told me the situation. Now he's sensing inside. He's told me the situation. We've talked about his feelings and his needs. He maybe looked at the list and he's come up with that. But then he's in this holding and letting space where the felt sense can inform him of something more that is going on. And he was able to get in touch with a felt sense. That's why I am teaching this class, because I saw even in this, very precarious situation of, me in Vermont, him in the parking lot in El Salvador, he could go into a space of looking inward. And when I talked to him the next week, he said, yeah, that situation has gotten a lot better. So that's the power of the felt sense. And I'm going to get into that more in the next few slides. Okay, now I just want to talk about what helped me as a person when I learned nonviolent communication. Others don't make me feel how I feel. My needs, met or unmet, make me feel how I feel. And also, I don't make others feel how they feel. If somebody's getting upset with me, I can realize that, it's their needs that are making them upset. It's not that I did something to them. I mean, maybe I could have, there could be some responsibility, but, this whole concept of, when you made me feel that, or I'm really sorry for making you feel that way, it's got me out of that whole thing. If I don't recognize my needs, how can I let anybody else know what I need? And usually that's the other wonderful facilitative thing about NVC is that, you know, we assume that it should be so obvious to someone else how we're feeling and what we need, but it's not obvious. And if we can't express that and let them know, then there's just myriad chances for misunderstanding. So that's that's and also you become so afraid of conflict because it's like unknown territory. But now that I know NVC, I can say, oh, obviously there's something that I need that I'm not getting, and there's something that the other person needs that they're not getting. So let's find out what that is. And isn't that a whole different attitude than what goes on in society today? Yes, and I have the right to express my feelings and needs. If somebody is mad at me, I will, well, I want to go to the next one too. Upset, angry people, and I think this goes to the previous question that I said I was going to answer later, when people don't cooperate. Upset, angry people must feel understood before they can listen. So when you know, 99% of the world's population doesn't understand about feelings and needs. So when someone is angry, even if you can't, even if they're not saying their needs or their feelings, they're just saying blah, 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 then you, you as a listener can sense what their feelings and needs are. And you can really make your best effort to show that you understand how they feel and the sources. You can guess, you know, maybe you're feeling so angry because you need understanding, or you know, you need cooperation. So a skilled NVC person will be able to listen to a person that isn't willing to cooperate in such a way that they can try to sense and try to know and be open in conversation too, to really understand what is so upsetting to this person and reflect it back. So that's, you know, similar to the focusing, you know, reflecting back to people. So that's a skill that we want to develop, and it truly disarms an angry, uncooperative person if we can show them first that they don't have to respond to our need first, but we can, you know, that you know, the last thing they expect when they're angry is for somebody to say, oh yeah, I see why you were so angry. You know, you expected me to be there on time. You expected me to show my loyalty by being there when I said I was going to be there. You were hurt because I was half an hour late. So that's a step that we can make towards someone who's uncooperative, and just see if that helps them say, yeah, well, yeah, of course I was, you know, and kind of see if that calms them down to where they can start, you know, maybe like with my partner, I didn't feel like I could say what I felt and needed at that time because he was really angry. So it was a few days later that I could start talking about, you know, what had been going on for me. And then even a few days later that I could really talk about the whole situation in an interactive way. So there's many stages to this. And I think the first thing we have to do as good giraffe speakers is to try to convince the person that we are willing to understand their needs. This is if you have a piece of paper, does everybody get just a blank sheet of paper? I want you to quickly copy what you see here onto that sheet of paper. And I didn't send it as a handout because I want to show you that you can just make your own little thing like this anytime you want with, if you're teaching or if you're just need to do it for yourself. So I want you to take a sheet of paper, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You don't need to write NVC stress test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at the top and at the bottom also. And then the word thoughts with a hyphen, and then with a colon, and then feelings and needs. And I want you to think about a situation where somebody said something, and I'm specifically talking about said something that you found stressful. If nobody said anything that you found stressful lately, that's great. In fact, you could even, the number 1 is low stress, number 10 is highest stress. So you could think about when somebody said something wonderful too, and your initial stress would be, in the lower registers. But I want you to think about a situation where somebody said something and then that caused some stress. And then I want you to mark your felt level of stress on the chart from 1 to 10. That's the first step. And then for those of you who are ready to move on, you can start writing your thoughts about that situation. And usually thoughts can be quite jackally, usually, so don't be surprised if some jackal thoughts come out. And then just to tell you the whole thing, and then I'll give you some minutes to do this. Then I want you to list your feelings and your needs in the situation. And I hope everybody has their list of needs that they can access. If they don't, I will go back. I'll just go back to the needs list and so you can see it. Okay. Now, what does focusing give nonviolent communication? Well, felt sensing the whole situation in the body. The bodily felt sense is of the whole situation, not just my idea of what happened, not just my emotions and my needs, but of everything having to do with this situation that can't be encapsulated in the concepts of observations, feelings, and needs. And like we saw in the card game, and we're talking about, there's often more cards that come out that show the multiplicity of things that you can feel in a very short interaction that happened. But there's even more intricacy. There's even more, Chenlin says it's like a Persian carpet, there's just an incredible mesh of experience and meaning that you access when you go into the bodily felt sense of a situation that's not just limited to emotions and to needs. And then there's the concept of carrying forward. So I'll tell you a problem that I have with nonviolent communication is that they have often when they're teaching it, they have other people guess your needs for you. And I hate that because it feels like they're, from not knowing me, from not knowing my whole situation, they're trying to guess my need. And as a focuser, I say, well, let me go in there and see what my whole implicit intricacy is in my felt sense, and let me have the time and space to and listening to do that, so that it can unfold from my own implicit intricacy. And when it does, then the quality of the felt sense is that it's looking for exactly the next step that will carry the whole situation forward. And if other people are saying, yeah, well, maybe you were feeling sad because you really need empathy, you know, like, hey, shut up. Give me my space to go in and see what's there for me. Because I know that that way I will come up, my felt sense will show me the next step that will carry the situation forward for me in the context of my life and who I am. Okay? I'm going to talk a little bit more about this now. Okay, so I want to now distinguish between the felt sense and emotions for people that might be new to focusing. And for those who are part of, who are focusers already, I decided to put quotes from Eugene Genlin's A Process Model, just because a lot of focusers are kind of, let's say me, I was afraid of the philosophy for a number of years when I was first learning focusing. And I just want to, the beautiful thing about, one of the amazing things about Genlin was that he said, you know, if you have practiced focusing, then you understand the philosophy of the implicit. So I want to show you, I hope, how that works. So how is a felt sense, which Genlin calls in, you know, philosophical terms, a direct referent, which means, you know, when I say all that, I know what all that is. So I'm referring directly to a, something in me that is without words, that I understand the complexity of it myself. And, you know, or you could say what what happened yesterday. Like if I am talking to a person that was with me and when we both kind of know what happened yesterday, but we might have very different takes on what happened yesterday. So a direct referent is referring directly inside yourself to something that doesn't yet, that isn't, that doesn't yet have words. So, and Genlin says, I have distinguished this new kind of feel, and you can feel this thing that doesn't have words as a vague, fuzzy sensation in your body. So he says, I've distinguished this new kind of feel from emotions or slotted feelings. Slotted feelings are, you know, what you're supposed to feel culturally given a situation. So he's saying these familiar feelings also make change, of course. And to me, that's the value of the NVC that we're talking about. Even we're talking about emotions and needs, and we do experience change, as many people did in the little exercise we just did. What one would say or do after such a feeling, an emotion, a slotted feeling comes, is different than before. So NVC can change us. But our new sequence, which means the felt sense, consists of changes to the whole. So that's what I found with focusing, the difference between focusing and NVC. If I go into my felt sense, I might find that there's a whole different conception of what was going on in this situation. I can, from my felt sense, I can see, oh, yeah, I was so upset by that conversation because it just reminds me of that time with my grandfather when I was 6, or it impinges on my whole plan for what I'm going to do in the future. I mean, that's what implicit intricacy is. There's a much more meaning, much more complex meaning in the felt sense that we can access than in feelings, regular feelings, emotions, things like that. So next he says, when a direct referent or felt sense forms and comes, and that's why we need that holding and letting space that NVC actually does give us when we're thinking about, wow, looking at the list, what were my feelings and what were my needs? We're surrounding ourselves in, we're dwelling in the situation, and that gives time for a felt sense to form and to come as hunger comes. So he says, when a direct reference forms and comes, something has gelled, something has happened, something, a great deal has fallen into place. So if I recognize that my felt sense is telling me, wow, what this person is saying goes against everything that I'm devoting my life to in the next few months, or if it reminds me of what happened with my grandfather when I was 7, if the handle functions as it should, the direct referent or the felt sense will form more stably. There will be an internal yes, yes, even if it's something negative, that the body will say, yes, yes, that's exactly how I feel. And a bodily sense that this is exactly right, even though one doesn't know what it refers to, or even though it's a, seemingly negative thing. We say, yeah, that's how I feel. And then each time, he says, the word or words are repeated. Each time the direct referent is waited for. And again, we have to, this can change as we go, yes, that's how I feel. Then it can change to something new that we're checking back. Well, how is it now? Now that I acknowledge that need, or now that I acknowledge that uncomfortable feeling, what happens then? So each time the direct referent is waited for, there's a sense of relief, something shifting, releasing, stirring in the body toward self-understanding. So even if it's something that's uncomfortable and saying, wow, I didn't realize that situation was producing all this in me, at least we know this is me. This is who I am. This is what's happening with me around that situation. And I can then, ask to be listened to, do more focusing, and that will lead me through my felt sensing to my own implicit intricacy that will then help me carry forward in this situation.